Welcome back, everyone. We're here today with Michelle Ewell, author of Mrs. Oswald Chambers and other books that you'll learn about later, as I'll put some links up at the end so that you can follow those to find out about Michelle's books. But today we're going to talk to Michelle about her process in writing this wonderful biography, research, the whole 9 yards, and I hope that you will all really benefit from hearing her insights. So, Michelle, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah, I love that you wrote me an email recently, and because I had sent you some questions, and you said someone said once that being a writer is like having English homework every day for the rest of your life. That is so perfect. I laughed so hard when I read that. It's excellent. So yes, here we are doing our English homework for writing. And we know that you began this huge work mostly because of David McCaslin's book, but you said that you wrote a novel, and I think that's more where I want to focus. You wrote a novel, so tell us a little bit about that, and tell us a little bit briefly of the transition from the novel to the biography.
The novel began because an editor was looking for a World War I novel that began the day the war began and ended the day the war ended. There's a very long story, which I write about in my newsletter. You can find out all this information at my webpage, www.michelleewell.com, which talks about all the research I did. There's a lot of links and lots of blog posts about this. But we came up with this idea of writing a coming-of-age story in which Oswald Chambers was a central point in a young woman's spiritual growth over the course of the war. So Oswald and therefore Biddy became what are called marquee characters in the novel. For me to accurately represent how they spoke, how they thought, because there was no way I was going to try to misrepresent Oswald Chambers, I did 2 days of research at Wheaton College in their special collections library, where I looked at a lot of photos, I read some letters, I got to touch Biddy's typewriter, I got to hold Oswald's Bible. I mean, it was a wonderful experience. And from that, I wrote my novel. But Biddy changed my novel. People who are writers understand that you write a novel, it's organized, you know what you're going to do, you know how it ends, you know how it begins. Sometimes it alters in the middle. I say that an outline is like the frame, and what happens inside the story is the craft, is the fun part, the creativity. So I like to see what happens within the context of the chapters. So I know what's going to happen in a chapter, I just don't necessarily know how we're going to get there.
Which, like you said, Biddy changed your book. And
Biddy made alterations in a couple characters, and she influenced several people, and she turned up far more often than I ever expected. And in the course then of finding out about her, I became interested in who she was as a person, and I realized that there's a lot more in here to this woman than we knew. And even after I pretty much got involved in writing the book, I was pretty shocked when I returned to Wheaton College and spent 5 days there scanning documents. I just stood in the Special Collections Library and scanned for 5 straight days. I barely even read anything. I was so busy collecting information because I live near San Francisco and I wasn't going to be able to get back. And in the course of that, discovered all sorts of nuances and themes running through her life that I just didn't know, particularly after Oswald's death, because she deliberately hid herself. I had to dig to find out information about Biddy. And
you were researching for 5 days at Wheaton, which is amazing. And how did you even get into Wheaton? Did you just walk in there and say, "Hi, I'm Michelle Ewell. I want to use your library"?
Yes, actually. I wrote ahead and I explained to the archivist there at the Special Collections Library, a wonderful guy named Keith Call, that I was coming, why I was coming, and what I was looking for. And Keith had it fairly well organized by the time I got there. So the 2 days I spent were very efficient. Then let me tell you what happened to me, because we worship a God who is efficient in several different ways, not just within the storyline, but also in our personal lives as we write. And as I walked into the library, there was a list of all the other papers that they have there in their Special Collections Library, including the papers of Madeleine L'Engle. And I said to Keith, gee, I wonder if you've got the letter I wrote to Madeline L'Engle. And he said, well, maybe. When did you write it? And I said, oh, I wrote it right after I graduated from college, right before I got married. I lost her reply years ago. And he just smiled politely. And the second day, while I was running through stuff, he looked up and he said, I wonder if you recognize this address. And he read off my home address from when I was growing up. And I said, yes. I said, I bet you had a different name, didn't you? Yes. And he had the letter in Madeline L'Engle's papers, the letter I wrote to her when I was 21 years old, talking about my dreams, talking about my hopes, talking about how much her books had meant to my life. I hadn't seen that letter since I dropped it in the mailbox. I think it was 36 years before. And again, I'd lost her reply. And he handed it to me, and Carmen, I didn't know what to think or feel. I can't even tell you what that emotion was. I took a picture of it. I scanned it.
Yeah.
But the thing that was such a blessing was all of those dreams, all of those hopes, all those desires had come true.
Yeah.
And what a gift to anyone, not just to a writer, not just to a normal person, but a blessing I wasn't looking for when I started writing this book, and yet he gave it to me.
What a lovely blessing to say, Michelle, I'm here and you're in the right place. You described her as a woman ahead of her time. How was she a woman ahead of her time?
Well, first off, it's important to know that the first 20 years of her life she spent under the reign of Queen Victoria. And as a result, she became very ill. She had bronchitis as a teenager and dropped out of school really when she was 14. But she had a driving ambition to work, to take care of her family. Her father died 6 months after she dropped out of school. And she loved school. She was a reader, and that was devastating. But she had a drive within her to do well. She was always striving for perfection. So she thought about what could she do, and she took a Pittman shorthand class, correspondence course. And her mother and her sister would drill her by reading, and then she'd take down with pencil on a piece of paper, pad of paper, steno book, for those of you who are familiar with those, and worked herself up to an incredible speed of 250 words per minute. I am speaking to you right now at 125 words per minute. So she was able basically to take down what I said verbatim, or in his case, what Oswald said verbatim. And her ambition was to become the prime minister of the prime minister's secretary of England. There was no female secretary. The prime minister of England did not get a female secretary until the middle of World War I. So that was 20 years ahead of that time. She was already striving for a formidable position. The other interesting thing, there are many interesting facts about her, but the other thing that made her a woman before her time was after World War I ended, she was left a penniless widow with a preschool child, a kindergarten age child. She returned, repatriated to an England that was broken. England after World War I nearly went to the same way that Russia did. Right. Very, very close. So many men were dead, so much societal problems. And she had an opportunity for some security, but instead chose to run and basically found and run a boutique publishing house, 80 years before self-publishing had ever been dreamt up. Formidable task, and she pulled it off beautifully. And we have, not just To My Utmost for His Highest, but 29 other books with Oswald Chambers' name on the title page.
So Michelle, Biddy Chambers lived an extraordinary life, for sure, as with Oswald and then apart from him, but her life ended tragically. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
It's hard to note what is tragic and what is not. To me, as a 21st century American, her life did have a tragic ending, almost an unfair ending, if you will. 5 years, in 1961, 5 years before she died, she came down with some disease of which I do not know. There have been conjectures of what it might have been. We simply don't know. We weren't there. And she began to lose her grip on her grip. Her mind began to become confused. she couldn't work anywhere anymore with the words. She had a difficult last 5 years of her life. But you know, Elizabeth Elliot had died 2 months before I did my research. And Elizabeth Elliot, another saint of the church, spent the last 10 years with dementia. Her family was very forthcoming about that. And I thought, Lord, why do you take such women and give them the last severe gift, if you will, of a horrible ending? You know, we all just want to lay down and go to sleep and wake up in heaven. I mean, that's the perfect end, right? And yet Biddy had 5 years of torment before that happened. In the middle of that, though, Kathleen continued to pray with her mother, hold her mother's hand. She would read the Daily Light as always. And there was a passage in the Daily Light that Biddy just clutched. What's that word? Clutched.
Yeah.
Onto, and that calmed her a little bit, but you know, she died. She died a sad death, really, in our concept of what death is. The important thing is that even as she struggled with her own faith during those last 5 years, the Lord knew her. Her salvation was secure. It is immaterial to God. He doesn't care what your IQ is. He doesn't care if you're mentally with it. He doesn't care if you have Alzheimer's. His love for you and his salvation for you is true all the way to the end. When my young grandmother had lost her mind, I used to pray that the Lord would speak to her in a place no one could reach. And he does. The Holy Spirit is in you. He is in you. He's not going away. And I think we fear losing our minds. What will happen? Is that my personality? Am I gone? What will I make a mistake? And the answer is, you may not be the same person to the world. You may not look the same to the world, but Jesus knows your heart. He knows who you are and will welcome you home, good and faithful servant.
Amen. So regarding editors, you said some really poignant things, that you trust and respect your editor. You have a wonderful relationship and friendship with him. You kind of learned how to work as a team. So you know when to sort of be rigid and maybe when to budge or not to budge. I wonder if you've had any experience with that budging tension with one of your editors.
I did have an incidents, and I was just very respectful. They're working on a budget. The publishers are working on a budget. We all have the same goal, that we'll have a quality book. And on this particular issue, I felt it was extremely important. And I talked to my agent first, and we agreed it was very important. And then I just said, I understand that there's a budget and a limitation. I just don't see this book without this.
Right.
And whatever I can do to help, I'm willing to do. And they went back and talked about my issue and agreed that it was an important part of this particular book. And we went with it. I hold no animosity. I'd have been disappointed if we hadn't been able to come to a resolution on this, but I was willing to do whatever it took, and personally, to make it happen. And it all came out fine. And it's important to respect the fact that publishers are in business. They know the book market better than I do.
Right.
And I have to trust that, because otherwise I could just do an ebook and it would be out there. But the quality of Mrs. Oswald Chambers was such a blessing to me. It was a beautiful book. When I saw just the proofs that I had to go through, I was so thankful and pleased. I love that they put the pictures in the middle, right where her life changed. The cover is gorgeous. They did a beautiful job. And as we're now in the marketing stages, I'm surprised by the things that they've done. I simply didn't know. Just because I didn't know it didn't mean they didn't do it. And I've had a wonderful experience working with Baker. I've loved them all, and they've all been terrific.
I'm so glad. That's so awesome. And yeah, pretty soon you're going to be rejoicing together when the book actually hits the shelves. It's going to be really fun. But this has been a long process, right? So writers need to understand that the traditional publishing is a long process. How do you feel about it now that you're nearing kind of that finish line?
Well, I understand. I mean, I finished writing the book 9 months ago, 10 months ago, and it's gone through several edits. It's gone through being typeset. It's been beautifully designed. It's been, it just takes a while for a book to get done well. and to do the marketing and publicity end of it. It's all bits and pieces and steps. I work at a literary agency, and I'm an editorial assistant at a literary agency, so I'm familiar with those steps. My other books, earlier books, were in collections, and it was a little shorter process, but it had to do with other angles on that. So I'm perfectly happy because what has been produced is gorgeous. Gorgeous.
It is indeed, and it's going to take its rightful place
Yay!
next to those other Oswald Chambers books. And I was so intrigued. I thought, if I ever get to go to Oxford or to London, I'm going to be looking for some of those books. They're probably all out of print, but I didn't even know that they existed. So it was really cool to learn that. So tell me quickly, what is next for you? And yeah, what's next for you in the writing world? And also as the author of Mrs. Oswald Chambers, what's next?
Well, actually, week from today, I will be at Wheaton College for a day that is celebrating the legacy of Oswald Chambers. I will be on a panel with Oswald's biographer, David McCaslin. I'll also be with Macy Halford, who wrote a beautiful memoir, My Utmost, a devotional memoir. It came out in February. And Harold Myra, an emeritus editor of Christianity Today. We'll be discussing the legacy of Oswald, and actually Biddy. They've sandwiched her in Chambers for the world. So that's my really exciting event, and that's a week from today. Yeah. Beyond that, we have, I have talks that I'm giving. I'm Skyping into book clubs. I have a launch party. At the moment, the launch party is uncertain simply because I'm currently evacuated from my home in Santa Rosa, California, and the launch party is a week from Sunday at church in Santa Rosa, California. We're not sure yet about the appropriateness of it. So many of my friends have lost their homes in the fires that I'm having a hard time putting together rejoicing over a book launch when my friends have nothing left. So, right. But that eventually we will have some sort of a party and we will rejoice together. Yeah. Biddy certainly was familiar with difficulties and challenges in life. All of Oswald Chambers' books were burnt in the London Blitz. And the entire warehouse went up in smoke. The books were all destroyed. And she had a choice. This was in 1941. And her comment at the time was, if this is the end of the books, this is the end of the books, and God will give me something different. Mm-hmm. As it happened, it wasn't the end of the books. Some people had plates to print here. Some people had extra copies here. There were a number of German editions of My Utmost for His Highest cached in Switzerland that they smuggled into Germany during the war to POW camps. Wow. And by the end of the war, it was all back in operation. But that was yet another time when she faced catastrophe and chose to be, well, God's going to do what he is going to do. And there we go.
Yeah. And I think her fortitude is a huge encouragement. In fact, wasn't it, it was that I was telling you, chapter 12 was one of my favorite chapters, where I cried like 3 or 4 times, and I wrote it down. And you called it the fires of sorrow. And I just thought, Lord, you guys are in the fires of sorrow right now. But Biddy's life is such an encouragement. And this book that you've completed is such a huge encouragement to people. I know it's going to go a long way. So I'm really, really excited to be part of your launch team and just to be a friend and to have access to this wonderful book. So thank you so much. And we'll be praying for you guys and for Santa Rosa. Lord willing, no wind and a little bit of rain. That would be really nice.
We'll take that. Thank you very much. My family, by the way, is fine. We're safe. Our houses are safe. But a lot of my friends are in our church, just in general. I mean, almost 3,000 homes have burned in our city. And that's a lot of people who are now homeless.
Yeah. And not just burned partway, but down to ashes.
There's nothing.
So, yeah, we saw that on the news. It was just, it's beyond belief. I don't know, but our God is big. And we definitely are praying for you guys there in Santa Rosa. And I know that your church is going to be a huge influence in your community. As you told me, was it yesterday or the day before when we talked, that this is a ministry field right now for you.
We feel that our ministry is set for the rest of our lives here as Christians, to help bind up the wounds, to heal the brokenhearted, to listen to the stories, to hold the hands, to weep with those who weep, to mourn those who mourn. It's right here. It's home for me right now.
That's awesome, Michelle. Well, God bless you, sweetheart. And thank you so much for being on at Carmen's Corner. It's a joy for me to share Mrs. Oswald Chambers with you, Michelle, and also with all of you guys who enjoy these posts. So pick it up on Tuesday, October 17th at your local bookstore, or maybe Amazon.com, or wherever you buy books. Mrs. Oswald.
Baker. My page on Baker has a list of a gazillion places you can buy the book. Right
awesome.
now.
We'll put that website up so everybody can access it. Okay. God bless you guys, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.